Welcome to the Noir Poise podcast, where wisdom is power is more than just a motto.
It's our way of life. While we don't claim to have all the answers, we're dedicated to delving deeper into different topics through meaningful conversations. As a duo, we bring different viewpoints to the table, enriching our joint journey towards growth and poise.
Join us as we explore and unlearn to relearn while striving to navigate life with poise. I read this interesting yet very simple quote by Stephen Covey, and it stated, "Accountability breeds responsibility." It breeds not the word responsibility, but it breeds your ability to respond.
I absolutely love that and agree wholeheartedly because I actually feel like with accountability, no one wants to be held responsible when it's something negative, but everyone wants to credit when it's something good. A lot of people don't get into a deeper part of their relationships because of the lack of accountability.
Right. Or even deeper parts of themselves. Because for me, accountability has been something that transformed the way I view myself, to be honest with you, and transformed the way I operate. So when I read that quote, I was just like, wow, that's very true. Because for me, as soon as I started taking accountability for things that I have done, even the things that I may have done it wasn't my intention, or I had no idea that I did, or even things that I did not do. Because sometimes we have to learn to take accountability for the things that we didn't do, the places that we didn't step up where we probably should have, or the things we didn't notice that we probably should have. Even in those situations, it's important to be able to self-reflect and take accountability for your actions or where you didn't take action.
Yeah. Growth or change can't come without you taking some kind of accountability first.
Yeah, I
And
agree
like
with that.
you, I had to learn that, I would say the hard way, where I noticed that things weren't changing in almost every aspect of my life because I wasn't willing to take accountability, not just for my own actions, but the scenarios that I'm in.
I also saw this other quote by Jean Hamilton Ford that said, "One side of accountability is courage, on the other side is freedom."
That could preach.
Right? These two quotes, I feel like that's exactly what occurred for me. There's a sense of like in the beginning of it, or when you're about to take, when you're about to take accountability, no one wants to take accountability for negative actions, or even when someone's telling you about something you've done or how you maybe express yourself. Like it never feels good to know that you potentially hurt someone, especially if it's someone that you love and care about. But as soon as you learn to just be like, you know what, I was wrong for that. Or even if you don't think you were wrong, but take accountability for what your actions made that person feel, there's a sense of like breathing that feels a little bit more easier after the fact. Like for me, that's what it has been. Like I've learned to just be like, you know what? I don't agree with what this person is saying. I don't feel like I've done anything or said anything to hurt so and so, but if they feel this way, this is how you feel, and this is how my words or my actions made you feel. So while I can't control what you feel, because sometimes, it's internal for the other person, but the least I can do is take accountability for my actions and know that, you know what I may have done or said made you feel a type of way, but it led me to a place to be able to also open up and explain my perspective and my intent and be okay even in moments when the other person doesn't agree with my perspective or intention, or doesn't see what I'm trying to get at or my explanations.
Yeah. You ever been in a debate or argument with someone, and it could be like 5, 10, 15, 20, it doesn't matter. It could be some time into it, and you're like, we're literally getting nowhere.
Yeah.
I'm just giving you an example so you can see how I feel.
Right.
You're giving me an example to see so I can see how you feel.
Yeah.
I used to fall into that pattern all the time, and I had so much energy invested in thinking of scenarios of
Yeah, I
Let
hear
me
you.
say this so they can see exactly how I feel.
Yeah.
And I think the moment when that stopped for me is when I learned to start taking accountability, where instead of using my energy to respond, I use my energy to, okay, let me at least take a moment and acknowledge where I went wrong.
Right.
Because we're humans in every situation. I can almost guarantee that if you're in a debate with someone, you're never 100% right. There's something, even if it's 99.9% right, there's something in there that you can still
Learn from.
learn.
Yeah,
And
I feel you.
that's what accountability in my interpretation means. It's acknowledging that you're human, you're not perfect. You Even if you haven't made a mistake, there's still something you can learn
Right.
from it.
Acknowledging you're part of the situation.
Right.
That's basically what it is for me too.
And I wanted to ask you, what does taking accountability look like in the practical sense?
Simply put, I would say listening to understand and not listening to prove yourself or give your explanation on where you stand about the situation. For a long time, I felt the need to explain to people or at least defend myself in situations where I felt like I had to explain where I was coming from, especially if I felt like my actions or my words were misconstrued and I felt innocent in the situation. So I felt the need to prove my innocence. But with accountability, what I do now is whenever someone has something to say to me, more times I have a reasoning that I can give, but I choose not to give that reasoning unless I feel like that reasoning is going to lead towards a beneficial result. If I feel like it's going to be a back and forth, or I don't feel like the person will comprehend it or understand where I'm coming from, I'm like, you know what? This is how it made them feel. This is a lesson. I'm just going to take it as, okay, the way I operated or the what I said may have made you feel this way. So I'm going to take that, learn from it and move on. And in the future, I'll approach you a different type of way rather than going back and forth over and over. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to be honest with you as much as I can, but I think it's all about being wise enough to know when you can do that and when you need to sit back and listen out to what the person is saying.
Yeah, I think if I had to describe it in practical terms, it would be literally finding an opportunity to acknowledge that you're willing to improve.
Exactly.
And from my experience, even if you're on your way to a debate or you're already in a debate or argument, that changes the energy of the conversation so much when you allow the person you're speaking to have that platform to say, you know what, I acknowledge your pain. I acknowledge your pain. I acknowledge your frustration. I acknowledge your disappointment and your sadness. And I may not know exactly what to do next, but I promise you that I will be working on it. That alone will neutralize any kind of negative
Yeah, because it gives the
emotion
other
or.
person no reason to like debate with you.
Right.
It's kind of like, oh, okay. All right. Well, that's good to know that you understand where I'm coming from. And it goes back to listening to understand and not listening to respond.
Yeah.
So that's why I love that quote that said, like, accountability allows you to have the ability to respond.
Yeah.
Literally. Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, it's not easy.
Heck no.
It's still not easy for me now, even though I've been practicing this for
Yeah.
a little while. But there were several times when I felt the need to make excuses. And even me right now using the term excuses, for me, it's actually a bit shocker because if I had a reasoning or rationale as far as why I did what I did, I didn't see it as an excuse.
Right.
But in reality, it's an excuse. So I realized that the reason why I was making excuses is because I felt the need to be perfect. And if someone acknowledged a mistake that I did or something that I didn't do, even if I was wrong, I had to show you that my intentions were still good.
Yeah, that I get actually. I never thought about it in the perspective of like trying to prove perfection, but that's actually what I was going to say because for me that was the challenge. It was often if someone says like, what you did or what you said was inaccurate or like I made a mistake or whatever the case is, if my intentions were pure, I then felt the need to illustrate that to the person, to kind of not illustrate but describe that to the person and give them an explanation on where I was coming from. And with some people, I found that giving that explanation didn't matter. It didn't make any change. They focused on the fact that, well, I was hurt or, well, I didn't like what occurred. So that led me to honestly just acknowledge people's feelings in a
Yeah.
different type of way. I started to just focus on the fact that, you know what, while it wasn't my intentions, that's not what I wanted to do. But at the end of the day, this is what this person feels. And if that, I say this all the time, if that person feels what they feel, who am I to tell them to feel otherwise because of how I saw it or what my perspective was? While it's good to kind of like give your perspective in certain situations because it can kind of shift how people viewed the whole situation. But I do think that sometimes acknowledging the feelings that they feel and growing from that alone makes a big difference. At least for me, I've noticed that. To be honest with you, and that's where the pros and cons come, because I feel like in certain relationships there were pros where people appreciated that and saw that, and we grew from it, and I knew how to approach the person in a different way. Whereas there's some relationships, unfortunately, it kind of grew a little bit distant because I felt like I couldn't be as transparent as I would like to be with the person without hurting their feelings. So then it's almost like I began walking on eggshells or withholding information
Yeah.
to protect them in a sense. So in situations like that, because I felt like I couldn't be as authentic as I wanted to be, I backed off. But then there's also the aspect of being authentic and knowing how to deliver the message appropriately. So there's so many different ways to look at it. But yes, it is a challenge. Yes, there are a lot of pros, but I also had to recognize that there are a few cons in there too, and it's kind of hard to deal with, especially depending on the relationship that you're in.
I'm glad that you used the word authentic because that's what I think a lot of people out there will struggle with is if I'm taking accountability, which means I'm giving you, the right to be offended or the right to express how you feel. And I'm essentially not making any excuses. I'm just saying, you know what? I'm sorry. I'll do better. My fear is, well, I don't like to use the word fear.
Yeah, reverse that.
My concern or my thoughts are if I don't explain myself in detail, you will then have the wrong perception of me. When or if this scenario arises again, we'll both be operating with different
Perception.
perceptions of
Yeah.
things. So it's always I feel a thin line between taking accountability and making excuses.
Yeah.
I sometimes literally have to tell myself, Sam, just shut up. Just don't explain yourself. Just take this as a learning moment. Literally, you can be talking to me and I'm listening and I'm telling myself this actively so I don't get into the habit of, yeah, but this is why I did it, or yeah, but this is how I felt.
Yeah.
So it's definitely, I say, a very thin line that it's not easy
Maneuver.
to maneuver or walk around or walk through. But going back to the quote that you read earlier, I love that on the opposite end, it is that freedom.
Yeah.
Because as difficult as it is at the moment to just swallow your pride and your ego and just be accountable, I've always had positive experiences in the sense of not at the moment when it's happening, but I feel like it's always made us a little closer
Got you.
when one person is able to take accountability and we just take a moment and breathe.
Yeah, I think in most cases that is what occurs, and that's why I feel like it depends on the relationship. Because to be honest with you, like I've had situations where it didn't. There's times where like later down the line, whether it may be like a year or two, the person grows an appreciation for what occurred, and then I may have like a different perception of what happened. But I have been in situations where it has caused a slight distance between me and certain people where I noticed, okay, I take accountability in the sense of I said something or did something that I shouldn't have. And when I explain to you my perspective or where I was coming from, you don't understand it. So then that lets me know, okay, in the future, let me not do something similar. So I feel like there's different types of accountability. So in that case, like I take accountability for hurting the person, but I also learn from the mistake. In certain situations, I can't be as blunt with you without hurting your feelings. So it's more so understanding that maybe my delivery is not the best for your personality. and we clash in that way. And so it creates a form of distance. So that's been the type of accountability that I've had to take as well. Because, like, what's done is done sometimes, unfortunately, but it taught me to act differently with other relationships. So because of that lesson I learned, I'm now like, okay, I remember what happened in this situation. Let me deliver my message differently this time. So that way it doesn't get the wrong reaction or I don't go out hurting people that I love and care about, you know? But sometimes what's done is done in certain relationships, unfortunately. And it can create that distance.
Have you ever felt that someone's explanation made the pain easier to bear? Because
Yeah. I've been in situations where it has. Well, not necessarily explanation, but more so their perception or their intention. Because there's many situations where we later on had a conversation and we're just like, oh, wow, I didn't know that's where you were coming from. And because I then know, like, oh, this is how he viewed it. So now understanding your perspective of the situation, I'm like, okay, he didn't do that to hurt me. He was actually trying to protect me and I assumed something different. So yeah, there's been many times where the person explaining their perspective or their intention about a situation has helped. I think that dialogue is often necessary. But again, I think it depends on the relationship. There's some relationships where you can't dive that deep without it becoming a thing or the person looking at you different later down the line. But if we're talking about like spousal relationships, then I think the dialogue often has to happen with certain situations, but the accountability comes in the sense of I'm not going to explain myself just to defend myself. I'm going to explain myself to let you know that I would never want to hurt you. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Yeah, that's what it is. I think it's the reasoning behind the explanation that's important when taking accountability and then acknowledging that you're taking accountability. Because in many situations, people may take the accountability in their mind, but don't express that to their spouse. Sometimes letting the person know, like, if you tell me, wow, I'm sorry that's how you felt. I'm sorry for making you feel that way. And you give me your perspective on what your intention was when you did that action. And then you tell me that you acknowledge where you went wrong and you'll try to implement a better technique in the future. Naturally, that's going to make me feel better about the situation because now I'm not in my head thinking like, why would he do that? Or why would he say, you know what I mean?
yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like it's all about the reasoning behind your explanation, not just explaining just to defend yourself. Because I think that's what we do a lot. And I've been in that situation in the past where it's more so egotistic, where it's like, I'm talking to defend myself or to give my point. I'm not talking so we can have an effective dialogue that's going to lead to a beneficial result.
I sometimes wonder if people just want a moment of validation. And no matter what you say at the moment, it makes no difference.
That's a good question. I feel like, yeah, validation is a very important part, honestly. I think we all just want to be seen and heard. So acknowledging that you see and hear the person, even if you don't agree with them, I think can often help a situation and diminish the chances of it leading to like, you know, conflict or an argument or something. So I think that's a good point. I don't think there's anything wrong with validating the person's feelings and what they're thinking while also, if necessary, telling them where their perception is wrong of your actions, so to say. Because at the end of the day, their feelings are their feelings, but that doesn't mean that, like, if things are not explained to us by others, we're just left to our own assumptions, right?
Yeah.
So I think sometimes that explanation is needed. But with accountability, I think it just makes you respond differently. So if I'm taking accountability for something that I've done or maybe didn't do that I should have done, I'm not then going to approach you in an egotistic way or prideful way that's going to lead to an argument because I'm trying to prove my point. I'm coming at you in the most humble way. And now, if you're coming at me incorrectly, you know what I mean? You're going to be yelling by yourself. So naturally, I think it just creates a more peaceful environment when it comes to things like that.
Do you think, and I ask this question because I know a lot of people, understandably so, have a hard time apologizing.
Yeah. Don't
Do
we
you
all?
think
Nobody wants to be wrong.
do you think that having accountability means you have to always apologize for something?
Not necessarily. Because I think there's apologizing for your actions and then apologizing for how the actions may have affected someone. I think it's important to apologize if your actions hurt someone that you love. I think that's the right approach, in my opinion. But does that mean that you always have to? Because I don't believe in apologizing for actions that you intended on doing. Now, if those actions that you intended on doing hurt someone that you love, it's only right that you apologize for hurting them and then let them know that that was never your intention, and maybe acknowledge the fact that your approach may not have been the best and you're going to learn from that. So as I'm saying, I'm like, yeah, you kind of, that's technically kind of apologizing. So yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with humbling yourself and apologizing in a situation like that. But then I'm also like, what if I wanted to tell you what I told you? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like in situations like that, what if I wanted to tell you what I told you? Am I then going to backstep and apologize for it? Or am I going to apologize for the fact that my delivery of it was wrong? I don't know.
I'm gonna ask you this question, and you can't say it
Depends.
depends. You can't say neither. You have to pick one.
We'll see.
For you, is it better when someone apologizes, meaning, they say they're sorry, they acknowledge their wrongdoing, or is it better if they make a commitment to do better? So if they say, you know what, next time I'll do better, but they don't necessarily apologize for what they did. Remember the rules.
I don't like the rules. I'm about to break them.
All right, you could say it depends, but yeah, give your reasoning.
Okay. It depends. It depends because I prefer actions over words. So if someone says they promise me they're going to do better and they illustrate that going forward and I never have to deal with that situation, I think I would prefer that in most situations. But there are times where whatever was done or said, there's probably not going to be another situation for it to occur. So in cases like that, I would say I prefer the apology. Because I'm thinking of situations like things like that occurred when I was younger or whatever, where like most parents, they live in this oblivious denial world where everything that occurred when you were a child was false
All the
until you,
negative things.
right, all the negative things, like they never, what, I never hit you, what, I never said that. I think that's a common parent thing I'm starting to learn as I talk to more parents. But once you lay it out for them, they're just like, oh, it starts to sound a little familiar and they have no excuses. So like for my mom, obviously I'm an adult now. We're both adults and there won't be those type of situations anymore. But unfortunately, those type of situations scorn me. We all experience that. It's all about tapping into it and realizing it. Things like that, I want the apology because it helps with the healing process, to be honest with you. But if it's a current situation, like if it's with you right now where you make a mistake and you give me your word that you're going to do better and you continue to do better, then I prefer the action over the words.
Okay, you know what? Those are good answers.
I told
I
you.
accept.
There's
Those
always a
depend.
gray area. You be trying to make me choose black and white. I'm like, there's always gray. And that's the thing about accountability. Since we touched on the whole parents thing and them kind of being in denial, I think it's because there's a sense of guilt and shame that comes when someone feels the need to take accountability. Like we said before, who wants to be wrong, right? None of us want to be wrong. It takes a really mature person and a humble person to acknowledge when they may have been wrong. And I think that's one of the things that society has implanted into our mind to make us think that, like, if you're taking accountability, you should be shameful, you should feel guilty. When in reality, it's just you being mature and you being humble in a situation and illustrating your care for that person who you may have wronged. Learning through situations and understanding that none of us are perfect. We're not going to do this the right way the first time around. We're all figuring things out. And I feel like a lot of times accountability is necessary in situations that we've only done for the first time, right? Like relationships, parenting, careers. There's no one set path or one set like rule book on how to do it. You learn as you go. So there's nothing wrong with acknowledging where you may have made a mistake.
I don't know if it's because we're living in the digital age and we have access to so much information, but I think society paints the picture that once you're wrong with anything, your reputation is shot.
That's an interesting take.
I could think of so many different scenarios. It could be in healthcare, it could be in sports, it could be in the financial markets where an expert makes a wrong prediction or a wrong interpretation and no one looks at them the same.
Yeah, that's true.
I think that carries on into our personal lives where
yeah. We think we're
worried
experts
that-
at life.
Exactly. Like we think
No.
that if I acknowledge that I did something wrong, then my credibility goes down.
Yeah, I could see that.
Then my
actually.
reputation goes down. I won't be seen as trustworthy with whatever it is that's in discussion. I think society has literally caused this mindset to trickle down from the expert level to
Yeah.
the everyday
Day-to-day.
level. Right.
That's crazy that you said that. I never would have connected that, but it actually makes me think of what you said earlier about the whole perfectionism thing, where it kind of makes you feel like you're not perfect. And I wonder if that's the case with most of us, where we feel like we're being the best husband or wife, the best employee or boss, the best child or parent. And then someone kind of like, in a sense, puts a mirror in front of us and we kind of
Yeah.
see what the truth is. So we have no choice but to get out of that denial of thinking that we're doing things perfectly.
Right.
Maybe it is the fact that there's so much information and we're here observing so much, so quick, so often, that we feel like we can't be human in a sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild. But at least for me, accountability has been one of like the life-changing things.
Same here. As we discussed earlier, I personally don't believe that you can have growth or change without being accountable. In every area of my life, I could think of the moment when I really started to see progress is when I started to take more accountability. Even in fatherhood or even in as a husband, I'm not on social media or anything. So sometimes information gets to me and I'm like, how did I even know about this? But I had to realize that I was afraid of being viewed as a bad husband and being viewed as a bad father. And I'm not even talking
You're
about
amazing at both.
bad.
That's the crazy part.
Thank you very much. But we had a conversation weeks ago where you asked me if I'm romantic. And my thought was to instantly say yes, because I think of the times where I've randomly brought you flowers or something random, like the movie show. But we had a discussion afterwards where you felt that and not putting words in your mouth, so if I say something wrong, correct me.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you're paraphrasing. So, go
But
ahead.
you essentially said that I'm not romantic, or I'm not as romantic as I could be, or something to that extent.
You're no longer as
I'm no longer,
romantic.
yeah.
Yeah.
There we go. And I'm sure I expressed things to show this, but I was really disappointed in your answer because, again, I'm afraid of being viewed as a bad husband. And then if you're not romantic, then it's like, bro, what are you doing?
That's funny.
But after the conversation, even during the conversation, but more so afterwards, I had to take accountability and think to myself, realistically, I've been on autopilot.
Yeah.
And
We both have.
again, not making excuses because there could be a million and one excuse as to why that is. But I had to tell myself, I have been on autopilot and I need to do better, period. But at that moment,
It doesn't feel that way.
it didn't feel that way.
Yeah.
At that moment, I felt like a bad husband.
Oh.
But it was because, again, me trying to be perfect. Whenever you're not perfect, you naturally think you failed. You don't think to yourself, no, this is just another opportunity to improve. But I think that's what society implements. And again, I'm not on social media to know what people are doing out there, but it was actually an eye opener for me as far as how society, even if in your seclusion, could still pressure you to think a certain way.
That's interesting.
And like we're talking about the whole reputation thing, I actually felt that at that moment my reputation was ruined, especially
Interesting.
since it wasn't like I was never romantic. You're making a statement that is not like it was. So to me, I felt like not only did I fail, but I fell off.
I see what you're saying. Even in that conversation, you said certain things to me, which in that moment, like we were talking about earlier, that's a good example on where you can give your intentions and your perspective, because there was a lot of things you expressed that I was like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Like it was a dialogue. It wasn't on some, I'm going to acknowledge your feelings and run with it. Because I think that can sometimes be a bad thing if you don't have a conversation.
Yeah.
That's all it is. Like conversations are necessary. You can't just constantly take what the person's feeling and run with it and be like, all right, I'll do better. I'll do better. Because then it can easily become one-sided. But I think that you do have the ability to be romantic. You've done romantic gestures in the past, and like you said, you've been on autopilot. And the same way you've been on autopilot, there's certain areas where I've been on autopilot. But it's interesting that you said like you felt like that your reputation in a sense would be ruined if you weren't up to par in a certain area of our relationship. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but it's crazy that you had that mindset. And like you said, that mindset led you to, in a sense, get defensive.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that we were able to, it was a 1 day conversation. It wasn't like we went back and forth or anything, but I'm glad that we were able to get to a middle ground and comprehend where the other person was coming from and respect where the other person was coming from and take into consideration how to grow from that. Because that's what accountability should do. Accountability should lead towards growth. So in that conversation, you were able to become aware that, okay, I have been on autopilot. She's not making this up. Although you felt the need to defend yourself, your eyes also opened based on certain things I was saying that you were like, oh, I think that probably made you realize how much you were on autopilot. Because there were
Yeah.
certain questions I was asking you, and I think it was kind of like an epiphany in the moment. At least that's what it seemed like it was. So that awareness and then you acknowledging some of the actions that you didn't take and also expressing your intentions led you to learn from the errors and then be accountable for your actions and then grow from it. Because ever since that conversation, I have seen little like gestures and changes that you have done. So clearly it led to growth. It led to benefits in our relationship. And that's the point of taking accountability, especially in relationships like these where you're with the person all the time, every day. You can't go back and forth proving your point, letting your pride get in the way, because that's how you end up arguing over like the smallest, most unimportant things. In the moment, it feels important because it's all about you explaining yourself and defending yourself rather than I'm giving you my perspective so you can understand that I did not intend to hurt you or I did not intend to not step up the way that I should have or whatever the case may be. That is accountability to me. It's knowing how to do that and being humble enough to acknowledge even when you don't think you did anything wrong, but knowing that whatever you did hurt the person that you love.
Yeah. It's all about, again, like we've been saying this whole episode, it's all about having the understanding that you're not perfect.
Yeah.
There's always an area where you could improve upon. Even if you thought you were doing great before, when someone shares something with you, that's your opportunity to learn to be greater.
Right. As if I did not read enough quotes this episode, I got another one to close out. You steadily grow into becoming your best as you choose to be accountable and accept responsibility for improvement. So, as we've been saying, remember you're not perfect. None of us are perfect. And because we're not perfect, You can always do better. Thank you for spending your time with us. We hope you gained some knowledge today that'll promote poise in your life. We have new episodes uploaded every Thursday right here, same place, same time. Until next time, you can follow us on Instagram at Noirpoise Podcast to stay connected. That's NOIRPOISED Podcast. We'd love to hear your feedback.
And remember, your wisdom is power.